Hey guys, this is Russ, and this is She Wolf Alchemy, and this is one of our quick check in episodes. Today, we're talking about feeling safe and surrendering, how your nervous system, pelvis, and pleasure are all connected. Now, I actually had this episode planned for quite a while, but I kept holding off on it because this is not my area of expertise. I know the general basis of it, and I kept saying, okay, I need to get someone who's an expert to really speak on it. And then also I was like, I have to find somebody that's comfortable speaking on this topic with me. And so I just kept pushing it off and pushing off and pushing it off. But recently I've been having to have a lot of conversation around somatic therapies and body trauma and healing. And I said, you know what? This is an exploratory video. It is okay to have this conversation in an exploratory manner, not coming in as the expert on the subject, but coming in as someone who sees the connection and want to have this conversation with y'all. So the reason why this has kind of been a topic I've been wanting to explore, me and Neek actually went to Toronto this summer. We had a ball. It was so fun. But while I was there, my sister lives in Canada, so she's the one that was playing band, and she was like, "Hey, girl, y'all come, y'all can play with us." And I met one of her girlfriends who was so awesome, had such a great time with her. And me and her were running around trying to get some curry. She was telling me that there's this amazing curry shop that she always goes to. I believe she lives in Calgary. And so she's like, whenever I'm in Toronto, I have to go. She's like, and I load up on the curry from here. So I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, I want some really good curry. Like, I have not found the type of curry that I want yet in Atlanta. So I was like, yeah, girl, let's go. And me and her ended up going by ourselves. So my sister was with her husband and her other friends kicking it at their place. We had dropped Neek back off at our Airbnb, and me and her were driving and we were talking. We're having this conversation. And in the conversation, it came up of women who have issues with control, also struggling to have issues with orgasm. And we were kind of talking about how, like, it's a common thing. And we got on this topic of like, well, yeah, because there's a certain level of surrender or a certain level of safety that's kind of needed for an orgasm, right? And even though we don't really always think of it in that way, we know there has been lots of research that talks about it. And so after me and her had this like really dope conversation about it, I kept saying, yo, that would be such an amazing topic. But I felt like I really need to get someone that can really speak to it deeply. But I kept struggling to find someone that could speak on it deeply, that wanted to speak on it in a public way. And so I kept being like, okay, I'm gonna put it off, I'm gonna put it off, I'm gonna put it off. But I think it's worth us exploring and just giving you guys the resources on how you guys can find books and experts on how to take this more in depth if you want. So this episode, we're talking about if you've ever felt stuck or frustrated and disconnected from your own body's capacity to experience pleasure. So let's just do a quick little review of our nervous system, right? So our nervous system has technically three states, but we're going to talk about two specific states, which is like our fight or flight state. And this is when you are like experiencing prolonged stress, right? When our body and our minds and us, we experience trauma and prolonged stress, our nervous system can get stuck in that state. That's that fight or flight. And it makes it hard for our body to find rest and feel natural and at ease in rest. Then we have the other side. If you're someone who has endured a lot of trauma and we have not healed it, a lot of times this is the state you are in, right? This is when I am feeling tense. My mind is racing a million miles per hour. This is like my body, my mind is constantly scanning for some type of threat. Even when I'm safe, even when nothing's happening, my body tenses up as if I am in the middle of a war zone. And it's like it's saying danger, danger. Then now the second one is our shutdown state. That's that dorsal state. And that is when basically you've been in fight or flight so long that you're exhausted, right? And your system just crashes. And that's when you start to feel disconnected, right? This is when you start to feel foggy. This is when you start to feel depressed and numb. It's like, okay, my body and mind has been in this fight or flight state for so long that I literally can't. And this can be kind of just now you feel completely shut down. This is when you low key feel disconnected from your body. This is where you low key feel disconnected from others. You are like, I barely have the energy to do the things I actually need to do. And so I don't have it in me to keep up in this thing. Now, the good thing about this is that we have something that we call neuroplasticity, which is that our brain has the ability to form new neural pathways, which all that means is that you are not doomed to stay in whatever cycle, whatever state that you're used to being in. The brain is very flexible. It has the ability to create new pathways. And so we can create new pathways, even if you're like, but my body has been stuck in that fight or flight one forever, it seems. Okay, and now we have a new forever, and we can change what that forever looks like. So, going back to that fight or flight state, this is kind of like when our nervous system gets stuck and oscillates irregularly, right? It doesn't find rest easily. And according to most of the mind body trauma research, trauma doesn't just like live in our memories, it gets stored in the bodies. If you guys follow us on Instagram, I post a lot of the body keeps the score jokes and memes. The Body Keeps the Score is this book that explains that trauma can literally reshape both our bodies and our brain, and that our body can be stored in our trauma. And so sometimes our body reacts, even though we don't like necessarily remember specifically the context of why our body is reacting some way, right? And he just talks about a lot of times how our body can remember trauma that has happened to us, even if our brain doesn't. Sometimes it's in our unconscious. We don't even recognize what that big trauma was. But all we know is like every February 20, I get very, very sad. I get very, very depressed. I get very, very angry and mad. And I get a lot of aches in my neck and I get very tense in my back. Our body might not always remember context, but it keeps the score. It stores that trauma, and there's certain things that can just randomly trigger that reaction back in our body, right? And the book kind of goes a little bit more into detail about that. It's a thick book, y'all. It's a good read if you're interested in that type of stuff, but like it's a thick book. So let me throw that out there before y'all go head to Amazon. But see, the thing is that the pelvic region or the sacral region can be an area that can be particularly changed by trauma because it's tied to a lot of vulnerability, pleasure, for some identity, for some boundaries, for a lot of us safety. And some experts have said, like the pelvic floor muscles, they are so ingrained and tied into our sense of safety and control, especially when it comes to our boundaries around our body. So, for some of us, if our nervous system is on guard, our pelvis or our sacral area can respond by bracing, by tightening, and completely shutting down to pleasure. And so, while you may still be active and being able to do the act, when it comes to pleasure, whether that's with someone or solo, if I am still trapped in a very tense, hypervigilant state in regards to my safety, it can block pleasure for some. Now, I know for a lot of us, especially if you are a millennial and older, we were kind of taught like pleasure and orgasms were like mechanical, but they're not. The more research we done on them, the more we realize like they're not. They are deeply and emotional. To orgasm, the body typically needs to shift out of a defense mode to have release. And if you are stuck in this hypervigilant, anxious state or freeze and flood states, the body might not permit the full letting go that's required for an orgasm. And this can be tied to a lot of different things. For some of us, this is tied to shame. For some of us, this is tied to sexual trauma. For some of us, this is tied to emotional shutdowns and negative beliefs. This is that I am broken, I don't deserve pleasure, or it feels unsafe to feel. All this raises alert in our nervous system. Even if it's not something I'm consciously thinking about as I'm doing the act, if this is what's floating around heavily in our unconscious, this can create barriers and tensions that reduce the ability to surrender long enough to have a sexual release. And I thought this was particularly interesting the more I kept reading into it. And because the more and more I talk to people, but women in particular, women in my personal life, I realize how normal it is for so many of us to be like, yeah, no, I don't really have the release that I see on like TV or that other people talk about. Or like, yeah, I know everybody talks about sex in a really, really casual way, but like it does not do it for me in a casual way. And that makes sense if you're a person who is very anxious and hyper vigilant and you require safety to make that happen. Because for some of us, even with partners who are safe partners, but if I have experienced certain types of trauma, emotional trauma, for example, that I have now connected to pleasure, then even when I'm with that safe person, I might still be experiencing something that makes it hard for me to kind of really have that release because some type of trauma that has happened that makes me go, it is not safe for me to lose control in my body. It is not safe for me to not stand guard and be very hyper vigilant about how much pleasure I let in. Again, guys, we're talking in the unconscious. So, in short, this is like I have the capacity for pleasure, but my nervous system, my body is saying, yeah, girl, I don't know if it's safe though. So, that mechanism is blocked. And this is why sometimes for some people, you may feel like sadness and anger and frustration or even tears when you are trying to get there because you want connection, you want release and safety, but the body is holding space for a deeper message that says, no, I have to protect. Now, on the spiritual side, that would also be for my chakra girlies, that would be that sacral area. And that is the seat, and that is the seat of like our creative life force, right? When we're speaking in spirituality, right? This is central energy, this is the flow of being. And if that energy is locked, it does not only make you feel shut down physically, but also it connects to feeling shut down creatively and also spiritually. So let's unpack this a little bit more. What can put us in this state, right? Where now it's blocking off pleasure. For some people, this can be having long periods of emotional shutdown. Long periods where you've just been like, I don't have time. I have to avoid my feelings. I have to suppress sensation. I have to deny vulnerability. You are essentially starving your system of integration. And the nervous system essentially is just compensating by bracing itself. This can also look like chronic hypervigilance, living on alert, not ready to release, but also not ready to receive. Another way this can begin is when we're struggling with a lot of sexual shame or like loss and trust in our body. If the body feels unsafe, or if we connect pleasure with pain or violation of our boundaries, then your body can learn that pleasure equals risk. And so your system just completely opts out. And this can look like this particular thing here. I ain't gonna get too graphic, folks. I ain't gonna get too graphic. Although I keep putting that this is for adults only, and I keep marking the explicit material button on Spotify whenever I upload a video, despite what we're talking about. I always check that off. Every time I get back our numbers, there's a little bit larger number. It's not big, but it's bigger than I want of people who are like 13 to 18 listening. And I'm like, y'all need to be in bed. Why are y'all listening to that? So I won't get too graphic, but this can kind of be that feeling of thing A used to get me there. A used to get me there. It used to be, I know if I get A, I'm going to have a release and it's going to be great, right? But if something happens and I'm now associating sex with shame or sex with a loss in trust. And here's the thing. Yes, this can be associated with big things, right? This can be associated with things like assault, but it can also be associated with things like I gave my body to a person and they emotionally violated, they emotionally hurt me. They emotionally did something that I am now kind of combining with love and sex. And I'm putting all those things together. And it's kind of creating this thing of like, no, pleasure is risk. Pleasure is risk. And the reason I want to put that out there is because I feel like sometimes when we talk about this, people think, immediately of assault, which is, yes, definitely a big one. And they go, but I don't have that. So why is my body doing this? Again, there are other ways for our mind to feel like we lost trust in the body or to feel like the body is unsafe and that pleasure is a risk. And sometimes when our mind and body decides pleasure is a risk, our system just decides to opt out altogether. And then, of course, there's a more physical side, which is like when over time your nervous system and musculature, especially like in the pelvic floor, carry tension as a default state. So now the blood flow, the nerve sensitivity, the ability to loosen, all of that gets compromised. It's kind of like, have you guys seen those TikToks? I know, I feel like 2022, 2023, it was all over my timeline where you had a lot of somatic therapists or somatic yoga instructors that were doing videos and they were talking about trauma is stored in the hip, right? I know most of us have probably seen those videos of trauma stored in the hip. And so they're like, that's why you got to twerk, girl. That's why you got to stretch. But trauma can be stored in the body. And from what I'm finding, sometimes that can take root in the pelvis. So, what you could be experiencing in regards to like the inability to finish, emotional reaction, irritation, or frustration can be interpreted not just as a sexual issue, but as a nerve, pleasure system, safety system, and body brace issue. So, okay, if that's the case, what do we do? Well, a couple of different things. One, of course, I'm always going to recommend if you have the ability to reach out to a professional, right? And if you're going to reach out to a professional, reach out to one who specializes in this thing. Because as a therapist, let me tell you, there are so many times people come into my office and they talk to me and they're like, "Yeah, I just learned this route on TikTok, animal therapy. Can we do this?" And I'm like, no, we cannot. I am not trained in that. And here's some trainings where, yes, we get the basic training in it, right? Nervous system, things like that. However, when you're doing these sorts of things, if you want someone that can get you really deep into it, you want to get someone that specializes in it, right? So keywords you might want to look for somatic therapists or like sex therapists. That would be some, they usually are going to be the ones you want to go to. And of course, there are tons of books on this. Like, for example, The Body Keeps a Score, a foundational text on how trauma impacts the brain. Another book is Healing Sexual Trauma Workbook. There's the Sexual Healing Journey book. There's the Biology of Trauma book. And then there's also one that's called The Nervous System Reset. And if you have some sexual abuse in your past that you believe is more correlated, the Courage to Heal workbook is one I know a couple of my colleagues have said they've always really liked and recommended to clients. Now, there are some small step by step things that you can do to kind of practice at home, right? One would be just beginning with orientation to your nervous system. Now, one of the ways you can do this is lie or sit comfortably and just notice your breath. Notice what body parts feel safe when you're doing your deep breathing and those that feel guarded. Do what we call a body scan, which is as you're doing that deep breathing, think about like a scanner in any other sense, right? You kind of have that line that starts at the bottom or the top and it goes all the way down. Kind of visualize that as you're doing your deep breath and allowing yourself to focus on wherever that scan is in your body. All right. It's not my forehead. What do I feel anything in particular in my forehead? Is that my nose? Am I feeling anything at my nose? Is that my throat? Am I feeling, oh, yep, I feel like I have a lump in my throat. All right. That's important to know. Why do I feel like I have a lump in my throat? It's like nervous, it's a tightness, okay? Now let it keep scanning. It's going down to my elbows. I'm not feeling anything there. It's getting down to my belly button. Yeah, no, there's a tightness in my stomach. It feels queasy. It feels anxious. It feels rumbling. Okay, doing that scan and making mental notes. Which parts feel unsafe? Which parts feel like, there's something here guarded? And kind of naming that for yourself. Now, I always recommend writing it somewhere, journal, your notes app, whatever. Making a list of like, okay, here's the areas of tightness and here are the areas of openness. Because you want to kind of have a starting point to, if you're going to do the work where you can recognize, nope, but you know what? I used to have this tightness in my chest and that's gone. Yeah, I'm still kind of struggling with, tightness in my neck, but that tightness in my chest is gone. If you kind of know where you're working with, where you're starting out, it's going to be easier to figure out when you're progressing and when change is actually happening. Now, you can also go online and go on somewhere like YouTube and find what nervous resetting meditations. I know one in particular that I personally like to use is like one is either you're laying or you're sitting back straight up and you're doing what we call belly breaths. And when you're doing a belly breath, you're doing a deep breath in, but I can feel the breath kind of like go all the way filling out my tummy. It's like your tummy even expands when you do this type of breath. That's how you know you're doing a belly breath, right? And I'm holding that breath for a couple seconds before I am releasing it. And I am mentally reminding myself that I am safe, that it is safe here, and that I can return to rest. Now, me personally, I like doing that as a nervous system reset because it's something that I can do anywhere, right? So, this can be something literally you can be driving. You can literally be in the living room with your family who is working your nerves, and you can sit there and straighten up your back and do a deep breath as you notice yourself feeling overwhelmed and just kind of mentally slowing down your breaths, holding it there, and reminding yourself, hey, I feel safe. Because when we do deep breaths in that way, it sends a signal to our brain of saying, hey, you are overwhelmed, calm down. And our brain sends out the signal, okay. Think of it as a laptop, right? Your laptop is overheating. And so you need to have a fan. Think of your deep breaths as that fan, telling your body, I'm overheating. I need to calm down. Now, here's the thing. Deep breaths, meditation, that does not work for everybody. All of our bodies are different, and I'm never one that believes in a one size fit all treatment. Which is why I also recommend you look and explore some of the other ones, like somatic movement. Going back to what I was talking about with those YouTube videos, right? Doing yoga poses like child's pose, supported bridge, or happy baby. And you can do that alone. You can do that as you try to go into a meditative state. You can do that in combination with your deep breaths. These are supportive practices. There's also been some research that shows that breathing and doing what we call vagal tone work, which is where you slow exhale, breathe, and humming in a way that kind of like creates a throat vibration. This has been known to kind of help shift towards a more what we call the ventral vagal state, right? The social engagement state, which is when our nervous system is online, we're relaxed, and we can do it without feeling like we're in a place where we constantly have to make a threat assessment. Now, going back to the spiritual side, because we're talking about the pelvic area, that's the sacral area, this is the life force, right? Creativity, pleasure. There are some practices that say, okay, if I'm feeling blocked in that area, it's because I need to be creating. And honestly, I have found that that is also a thing that has worked. I know for me, when I have been in a space where I have not been creative for long periods of time, it messes everything up. I feel like I'm foggier in the brain. I make less sense. I am more tense and anxious in my body, but also just in my mind. And you can tell in my communication. I have a homegirl now who, whenever I'm cranky, they're like, when's the last time you did something creative? And I'm like, I hate that you know me so well. You're right. You're right. And they'll tell me that, like, girl, okay, well, I'm free tomorrow. Let's space time and color. We'll have a whole conversation, coloring, drawing, painting, doing whatever together. And so that can also be one of the things that you explore for yourself. And if you want more creative ideas, when you're thinking about it, you can Google sacral activities for creativity or pleasure. Now, as I said in the beginning, always I think the best result, if this is something that you're like, no, I am seriously struggling with this, we want to get therapeutic support. Going back to what I said earlier, this can be a somatic therapist or it can be a pelvic floor specialist that can guide you personally in releasing deeply held tension and trauma. Because here's the thing, this chakra is like the center of fluidity, right? Creation, connection to the self through pleasure and movement. So if that is blocked, you might feel disconnected. If we're looking from a spiritual lens, you might feel disconnected from your body's wisdom. And it is okay if you want to look at pleasure as a spiritual practice and training yourself to allow pleasure safely and seeing that as aligning with the source, with your vitality, with a sacred yes. Shame and trauma and fear, it can act like no's in this field. They block the current. The nervous system holds the no until there's a genuine yes being embodied. So if you're like, girl, I don't know, I don't feel comfortable calling it a sexual healing. Okay, well then let's call it spiritual reclamation. Reopening that sacral field means you reclaim your capacity to feel and to flow and to create and to delight. Now, as I said earlier, I am a big advocate, obviously, for getting therapeutic support. And like I said earlier, if you're like, okay, but like, do I just walk up to any therapist and say this? No, please don't do that. That also makes us nervous. But you can look into a somatic therapist or a pelvic floor specialist, and they can actually guide you. You can have sessions where you are guided in releasing deeply held tension and trauma. And this is their specialty. This is their bread and butter. I recommend that you look into it. There's also yoga specialists who they do different types of yoga where they focus in heavily on that too. Now, I thank you guys for just kind of being here with me today. And if you're feeling stuck, know this, your body is not broken. It's just trying to survive. And right now, we're learning how to let healing be about inviting safety and restoring surrender and reconnecting with pleasure as a pathway to wholeness. Now, one of the things I want to also share is like, because there's different types of therapy. For some of us, talk therapy is what we need and it's great and it's nice to have a safe place to explore your thoughts and process. But for some of us and for some of our traumas, talk therapy just simply is not the best way to go about it. And so if you feel like, look, I've tried talk therapy and it's not for me, or it didn't heal, or it did a little bit, but like not enough. Okay. Be open to exploring other forms of therapy too, because there are other forms out there and they're really great. But like with talk therapy, all therapies are requiring you to be in a space where you're open to change and open to exploring and understanding that I might have to do something different, because you are worth the full healing of not only your mind and your spirit, but also of your body. Now, until next time, you should hear the sound of my voice with a new episode soon enough. I hope you guys had a great week. And you'll hear from me soon. Bye.